Okay, so Tess Harris and Kristen Snedden are with us. They're both, Tess is the staff person from the city working with the State Street Planning Committee. Is that the accurate name of that committee? And maybe you should kick it off, Tess. I think what we want to
Sure.
here's my goal. Why we wanted this. There's been this controversies, several controversies. Mayor Randy has made his some of his feelings known, and what I think has not gotten sufficient public awareness is what is actually happening in this committee's work and how that is going. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to enlighten this group. Most of us are people who are engaged in community life, and so it's a good group to share this knowledge with. Uh, and we're eager to hear from you. So take it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I have a short presentation that I thought I would go through as I talk through what's happening with the State Street Master Plan and what's happening with State Street today. So I hope that works for everybody. Can you all see the screen okay? Okay,
Yes.
great. Um, so I'm going to get started really by talking through what's happening on State Street. And I'm going to focus the presentation. I'll run through the slides pretty quickly, but focusing on the master plan, which is on the right-hand side. It's the long-term vision for the next 20 to 30 plus years. So really, what do we want to see downtown become? What do we want the future of Santa Barbara and the downtown core to really look like? And it's rethinking in many ways what that could be. It's kind of redefining the space as an urban neighborhood, as a community space for everybody, and as being an attraction in and of itself. So the plan for the master plan consists of the design, which is what a lot of the conversation is about right now, the different concepts that are starting to slowly come out. And then also a really big component of it is going to be around the implementation or the management side of the actual master plan. So what I mean by that is the financing or funding, the maintenance, the operations, how we also roll out the plan in terms of phasing. And then I'm going to switch over on the left-hand side to talk about the short-term improvements. So again, we've got an ambulance going by, one moment. So for really what's happening on the ground on State Street today. So some of the things that the city has been working on so far are things like ADA compliance, making sure that parklets are meeting all ADA regulations, implementing an outdoor dining fee, and then City Council is creating this new committee. It started out as the interim operations committee, and Councilmember Snedden is a part of that. And that was an ad hoc committee that where 3 council members met and talked about different pilot projects with staff. That committee is going to continue in sort of a different form as a Brown Act committee, meaning it's open to the public, and we'll have really more opportunity to really talk through different pilot projects and try to get things on the ground and running sooner than later so that we can really use those pilots to help us understand what we're going to do in the long term. So we can talk about both of those, but I'm going to focus on the master plan for a minute. So this is the project area. We talk often about State Street, but it also includes the blocks from Chapala to Anacapa. It goes all the way to the underpass and then over to Sola Street. And then this slide is intended to highlight the vision and really take a step back and answer the question of why we're doing this master plan in the first place. It's really a pretty amazing opportunity that the city took to decide that we're going to rethink about our downtown and invest in our community, and emphasizing this space that can be really different and unique and set Santa Barbara apart even more so than it is today. And you'll see different things on this slide. One of the bullets towards the end talks about housing as well. And so while this is really focused on the public space element, there's an understanding that we need to think about downtown as having more people in the space, and how do we bring and attract more people, not just visiting and not just coming to the area, but actually living in the downtown core. And so we did a survey back from November through the end of January with about 6,000 responses. And some of these next few slides highlight the responses that we received from that survey. So quite a pretty large number of responses that indicated some desire in the project area to have an element with no vehicles on State Street. We also conducted some design workshops trying to get community members to really walk through on a map what they wanted to see in certain spaces on a street. There was an emphasis on this curbless or flat street approach, and that helps with a variety of things, helps with programming and different types of elements that we might want to have in the street, but also with accessibility. This should be probably no surprise, but there's a clear, strong desire to have arts and performance really throughout the entire area. You'll also see seating areas was high on the list as well. And really all of these numbers, even kiosks and large event spaces, those numbers are still pretty high at almost 40%. This shows the same statistics, just emphasizing the need for different types of public seating. And then really emphasizing this space for families. And so when we talk about this central area for our downtown, it's thinking about a space that can accommodate people at a young age and at an older age and everybody in between. And what is going to be that draw that brings people to that center. Activating the center blocks, we'll talk about this a little bit through the State Street Advisory Committee again in our August meeting, but really talking about those 700 to the 900 blocks, or Ortega to Canon Perdido. And those blocks right now don't have as much traction as the blocks on the edges, and that's primarily likely due to the fact that there are less food and beverage businesses in that area, and as well as the fact that, you know, Paseo Nuevo is right there, and the loss of Macy's and Nordstrom's does play a role in that sort of loss of traffic. And so transitioning into what makes public space great. So this is coming from a number of different publications. And Santa Barbara has a lot of things that make public space great already, which really lends us to just starting off on a positive foot. We have this amazing tree canopy over State Street. It's pretty incredible to hear a number of people that come or have conversations with us at the city and talk about that component. And that greenery or that green space feel was also highlighted in the survey. It was actually the highest number, had indicated a desire for more trees or to maintain the tree canopy at 90% of responses. And then the climate factor, the factor of comfort of, you know, that plays a role in any type of a public space, and making sure that it can be something that's not just a space that's really active in the summer months or the spring months, but that can also be active in the fall and the winter. So I'm going to talk a little bit about districts, and to do that, I pulled one of the pages from the AIA Design Charrette. They did a summary recently summarizing what their 2020 charrette entailed, and I found some of the images to be really inspiring in terms of how do we think about how we can re-identify our downtown core. And so some of the things here, just ways that that they're using landscape and using art and different types of infrastructure to just bring a space that's already great, even to a higher standard. And so at this point, what really the community, as well as the State Street Advisory Committee, has been talking about different sections of the State Street Promenade today and the project area. And we've really come through these three different areas as the three districts that we're going to be focusing on as we go through further designs. And so we have the Arts District up towards the Arlington Theater or the 1300 block down to Carrillo. And that district really has been the Arts District. It's organically, that name has come up on their own, which I think is really great. So that is one component. The Entertainment District or Old Town is another name that we're starting to think about, is the 300 block or the undercrossing through Ortega Street. And that's really where you see more of the nightlife, you see more some restaurants, bars, but that has a really interesting character and history to it as well. And so trying to pull that up in this district and really highlight what it was and what it is today, and as well as the connection to the waterfront. I think this one's also really interesting because this is the part of the full project area that a lot of visitors are going to come to and may not get to the other parts of the promenade necessarily, but this is sort of a gateway in many regards. And so really bringing that to light. And then the city center or civic plaza, and the names may change a bit here as well, but this is the area that probably needs the most love at the moment, but also has so many amazing jewels really and things to celebrate right in this space with, the Libero Theater is right there. We have City Hall, we have De La Guerra Plaza, this great sort of, we have El Paseo, we have Paseo Nuevo on the other side. And then just really thinking through what a real grand plaza or paseo feel could be like right in this city core. What could Santa Barbara's plaza look like? And that is seeming to really feel like it could resonate in this central area. What that also means is that we're looking at different types of activations in this area that might attract or might be more attractive from a neighborhood standpoint. So how do we, as we're thinking about housing and thinking about bringing more people to the space, what do we want, what do people want to have in their neighborhood? And this could be that piece there. And so I'm going to talk through some of the different design components that we're starting to really think through. And these are just examples, but things that could be put into the streetscape to really bring it to life. So you'll see some play elements, artistic elements, and those, what I think is important here is most things can be used for dual purposes. And that also means that they can be really flexible. So you can have this seating that also can act as a stage at times, or you can have an art display that becomes a play space as well. Doesn't have to be one or the other. This also came from the AIA design charrette and is highlighting the performance space and the idea of this being a real zone for community events. And that's something we've seen, right? Pre-pandemic with a lot of the parade, with the various parades that came down State Street. We see it with a number of marches or protests that often happen either in De La Guerra Plaza or right at the Museum of Art Steps. And we see it when there are musicians and other performers that pop up on the street. And so really trying to emphasize that. This also shows just another sort of element of how we can start to think about the streetscape, and that comes in a variety of forms: landscaping, lighting, different types of amenities here. And then we get into circulation, and one of them, a couple of the main topics of discussion of interest are shuttles as well as bikes. And so we are looking at different ideas for what a shuttle could potentially look like. These by no means are what they will look like. These are just examples from a couple other locations. But what I like about these is that they're pretty small. and that they can be really flexible. So some of these are app-based where you can call it on your phone and it's on demand rather than running at a set schedule. But there are also other options that could potentially run at a set schedule. And then the conversation around, do we want these to be on State Street itself, or do we want to be circulating around? And that's something that the committee will be talking about in a meeting that will likely happen early October. And then the bike question and bike facility examples. And one of the components of bringing more people downtown and encouraging housing and more use is how we make sure people are moving not only within the downtown area, but to and from. And that it can be vehicles, it can be buses or shuttles. It also can be alternative transportation like bikes. And so needing to have a facility, and that pre-pandemic was certainly State Street and still is State Street at the moment, that connects the different areas of our city. And so that may continue to be State Street. It may be a variation of other areas around. That's something that we're still going to be talking about with the State Street Advisory Committee. One of the things I'll highlight here, though, is the emphasis of really defining the space. And so right now we don't have great definition, and we hear a lot of concern from both pedestrians and cyclists around who the space belongs to and issues that both face. And so regardless, I think there will be some clear delineation on where people should be depending on the type of mode that they are. This also came from the AIA design charrette. And this one I put in here because I think it's a really just kind of a neat way to talk about the plaza feel on this left-hand side. And so you'll see the way that they sort of drew it out is you've got this big central focus or node in one section, and then you've got the sort of linear pathways on either side, but it's not one straight shot. So if you're walking up State Street from here, you're going to see this landscape or whatever might happen in this area. The same with as you're walking down here, so you don't get a straight shot all the way down to see a street, but you have some more variability and just some things that are a little bit more interesting to the eye. Mm-hmm. And then I think this is one of the last slides, but really highlighting the Paseo network. And this is something that I think will be lifted up a bit more in our upcoming discussions, with the emphasis of State Street right now. You know, that's certainly there, but also there can be a connection point to a lot of Paseos, and that might just be highlighting where Paseos currently are. There's some really small design changes that can be done or enhancements, things like adding crosswalks so that people know that there actually is a continuing pathway from one side of a block to another in order to get to the next Paseo. So really emphasizing that network. Okay. And then next steps, so we have a State Street Advisory Committee meeting coming up on August 21st. That's a continuation from our May meetings, where we first started to talk about some draft concept ideas. I have the concepts. I'm happy to share them with you all if you want to talk about them. But I purposely didn't put them in here because they will change a little bit for the next meeting. And that's the intent, is that we got feedback from the May meeting, and we are making some pretty different adjustments in terms of even the way that the designs look like. You'll see that they'll be a little bit more sketch based and really emphasizing what the vision of each of the districts are. So we anticipate that'll be in August, and then we'll likely have a meeting at the first week or so of October to talk about the mobility aspect of the plan. And then we'll be going out to do more community outreach around that same time in the fall. I expect that we would have an understanding of what that conceptual design looks like as well in the probably mid fall timeframe. And at that same time, we're going to start to work on the implementation or management side of the plan with the goal of still getting to City Council sometime early next year. And so more information, you're always welcome to reach out to me. I can put my contact information, my direct contact info in the chat, or you can contact us from that email. And then you can also, if you're not signed up for our newsletter or our email list, if you go to our website at statestreet.santabarbaraca.gov, you can sign up. And we just notify you when different community outreach events and different State Street Advisory Committee meetings or City Council meetings are coming up related to State Street efforts. And so that's the sort of the end of the presentation for me. This is an overall timeline of the master plan, but I'm happy to take any questions that you have about the master plan. And I'm also happy to take questions on the interim operations or pilot programs and what's happening today on State Street.
Very good. So I see that there was a question about whether the advisory committee is a public meeting, which it is. And Hillary, welcome to Hillary. I thought you alluded to housing as a key feature of the plan, but I didn't hear you say anything about it. Did you want to add that?
Sure. Yeah. So housing is a key component of the plan, and right now the plan is really designed to be a public space plan, meaning we are looking at what kind of improvements we might be doing in the 80 feet of right-of-way that we have. But that also means that we need to be thinking about what kind of improvements can we do that encourages housing in the immediate area, as well as what kind of permitting and policy shifts might need to happen in order to
this is really SB10. I'm coming in late.
In order to really incentivize more housing development, and just recognizing the numbers are not great right now. They're under 5 in the project area itself. We have under 5% of the total square footage is dedicated to housing units, and that number in really ideally would be closer to a 20 to 30% square footage, and that's what we're trying to drive. So it's a bit of a mix there. I'm happy to go into more detail if you want to chat about any specifics.
Okay, so we've got Hillary has joined us, and we had invited her to participate. She's a member of the advisory committee, and she's also a staff person at MTD, and our council person, Kristen Stedden, is also on the advisory committee and active in the council discussions of this. So
is Diane Black. I see her here too. Yeah.
Oh, Diane is also on the committee? Oh,
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So any of you want to chime in and make additional points or comments about all what Tess has outlined, or anything else about the whole work? And I should just throw in, so I'm curious about trying to understand what the controversies reported in the press have been. Where are there conflicts around this? What are the bumpy parts of this? And where public voices will be most needed in trying to clarify what's going on. So anyway, Hillary, because we invited you and you
Sure.
made an effort to come, why don't you pick up the ball?
Sure. Well, first of all, good to see you all. Good to see a lot of familiar faces, and thanks for the invitation, Dick. Like Dick said, I'm Hillary Blackerby. My day job is with MTD. Today, I'm talking as a member of the State Street Advisory Committee, just as a regular old Santa Barbarian. But I also serve on the city's Transportation and Circulation Committee, and have for 13 years or so. We actually had a meeting last night on this very topic, on the topic of State Street and transportation. And to your question, Dick, what has been the hottest thing? What's the hottest topic? And I'll put this in SB Can terms, right?
Yeah.
Housing, open space, and transportation. The T has been the hot part.
Right.
We knew it would be, or I knew it would be anyway. Bikes, shuttles, pedestrians, where, when, how, traffic, who knows? That's the, to me, what I've seen is that's the kernel of conflict. Some of these other things I think are more amorphous, or we have less control over, in the sense of housing, right? Like, I do hope that there's strong recommendations in this about that we don't just walk away from the master plan process and say, hope somebody builds housing. Like, that I think would be unacceptable. For me, there are a lot of other components, right, that need to go into this. But at the end of the day, the thing that most people want to talk about and argue about and think about or freak out about is when I go down, when it's done, whenever that's going to be, right, when it's done, what's it going to feel like? How am I going to be able to get around? On what mode will I feel safe getting around, right? And so that's been, I think, the biggest source of conflict. Not that conflict is a bad thing. I don't see it as a bad thing. That's how we figure things out, right? That's been one of the biggest sources of drama, let's say. And I don't know, Kristen had her hand up, and Diane, I have more thoughts and things I'd like to share, but go ahead, Kristen.
Kristen, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I just want to just step back, just in really big picture, broad picture, for just a quick second. This master plan process, like, I had been asking for this in conjunction with the AIA charrettes from long before the pandemic. So this is, I just want to really emphasize this. This wasn't, it kind of jump started it, but it wasn't a response to pandemic, but pandemic just kind of highlighted how much we needed this and wanted this. But the original tenets, and ones that I'll keep bringing back in the master planning process, was this question of housing. So we had Library Plaza, De La Guerra Plaza, and we kept talking about housing. And so at the same time, we're working on an adaptive reuse ordinance to make it streamline ability to turn those dead spaces into livable spaces in a more practical way. So we had all these components, and the question started becoming, well, how do the paseos interconnect? Do we need a park downtown? Do we need a school downtown? Where will that housing go? And in the AIA charrettes, they have a lot of building sites kind of identified as potential housing. So for me, big picture, broad base is, where are those housing possibilities? How will they tie in? And then how do we make that downtown space like a living room and a park, like not a mall, but a park, and enjoyable for everyone? So just big picture wise, housing has to be one of the anchors for everything. And we really do need to identify that long term. And then the other is that integration with paseos, and then also our historic landmarks committee, and how we're highlighting the architecture that exists and how that can be brought in. But that's sort of the big picture. But in the interim, and I just want to speak to that really quickly, on these, what we need to do to keep momentum going, in my opinion, for this master planning is, really clean up the way that we do the parklets, and have, HLC input. Again, they've been sort of left out of the process, and bring them back in. We needed to be safe, and that includes the bicycle safety. And I get really excited when I see Tess's slides of all the different ways you could delineate bike spaces. We're ready. We can try some of these out. And I think we really need to show the community and the public that we can have it all. We can have these bike lanes, and I'd really like to see a people mover or a tram now, like those ones that were shown in the slides too. I love the Fran. It doesn't matter which one, but something slow moving like in an airport or Disneyland, that it can work with people also as promenade. And then a couple blocks that are purely promenade. Let's try that. Let's at least have 2 blocks in one place and 2 blocks someplace else. And those are things in this interim operations, where if you really want to have input on something to pilot and try, now that that's a Brown Act committee and open to the public, and we really want to get all that kind of input, and Tess will be heading that up too. And so I think it's really exciting time that that's formalized or will be formalized so that we can really start trying these things. So I won't interject more than that, but I just, so the framework of it, that housing is really was one of the original reasons for wanting to tie this all together.
Thank you. So by the way, we now have a new big dead space that you mentioned, dead space. So we've got this news press building.
It's been dead for a while.
I
Yeah.
know, but now it's officially dead. So that may be another asset. I don't know. Anyway, one question, just how does the council committee that you're on going to relate to the State Street Advisory Committee? Is there any problem there of coordination, or is this going to help?
From my perspective and
Yes,
why
from
I
your
proposed it is
Yeah.
that I think it will help. I think we can try things that could inform the master plan, but they won't be necessarily, we have to be really clear with the public that that doesn't mean that we're now implementing the master plan and this is how it's going to be forever. It has to be really clear. These are pilots. These are, these are trials, and hopefully people are excited about them when they start to see them. But it's separate processes, but hopefully it can support. And then the other way, like if we can handle this bike situation, which we absolutely have to handle, then that's also supportive of the master planning process, so that that doesn't have to be the hot button topic like Hillary was talking about that sort of takes over every meeting.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Councilmember Snedden, because bringing that interim piece into the sunshine was so important, because I think some of the biggest sort of bungled bits of this so far have been, it was happening in a committee that wasn't open to the public. And I don't think that's really what council wanted anyway. Wasn't open to the public. They would make these changes. It would there'd be a press release the morning of a change. And then everyone, of course, it's a small town. So at least for me, and I know other people on the committee, people go, what the hell's going on State Street? And I could say, I literally have no idea, despite being on this committee.
Which was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, it was. And so I hope that, I think, and there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen on this, as far as departments and stuff like that. I think we're getting to realize that. And I think the initiation of this actual Open Brown Act subcommittee will make a big difference, because we can we can be aware of what's coming and then message to the public, hey, we're trying things out, not this is happening, no further, no comment, right? So I just want to say, Councilmember Sen, I appreciate you pushing that, because I think you see how it all works and how it's received by the community. So
Very
sorry,
good.
Diane, didn't want to step on you there.
Go ahead, Diane.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to echo that. I think Hillary's right. I think that bikes has been the most controversial part of the plan. There are other things that are, and there are other politics at play, it seems like, that makes things a little bit mucky. I don't think it was helpful for the mayor to, sort of take on the rest of the council. But there are a couple other issues that have been sticky as well. The extent of the closure. I think most people agree that the closure should occur, but the extent of it's still pretty up in the air. The 400 block is a sticking point for some people, including me. And the areas of controversy have really kind of taken over and haven't allowed us to focus on some other things that I think are super important, like housing and affordable housing. And, I think a lot of people on the committee are kind of tired of that and are trying to figure out a way to move on to some more important issues. And I think that I don't know what you're called now, the old ad hoc committee, actually trying out some things so that we can see what happens when bikes actually are given some instructions and pedestrians are given some instructions on how to operate on State Street is a really positive step. And, I wish it would have happened a year ago when the green stripes were taken off. It was unfortunate that we lost all this time, but, we are where we are. And so I think there are ways to help us get over it. The meeting I went to that Hillary talked about last night was excellent. I mean, it was an excellent presentation on sort of all the transportation modes on State Street and various considerations. And, it's all a bunch of trade-offs. just like everything in life, there's only so much width on State Street, and we have to figure out how to use that the best way to support the community. And I think from my perspective, and I'm sort of shifting a little bit, which is good because, information helps you make better decisions. I'm really looking at it a little bit more like, how are we going to support the neighborhood? Because we want this to be more of a neighborhood. And so how is that neighborhood going to be supported? And if the neighborhood's supported in a really positive way, then tourists will come because they'll like it. We don't go to Europe because there's a tourist area. We go there because they're great neighborhoods. And so I'm starting to see the value of looking at things a little bit differently. So I'm really hopeful that we'll make some good progress in the next meeting or two, and we'll be able to start talking about issues that are really, I think, important to this group.
Thank you. So Diane mentioned two conflicts that I think I would appreciate a little more clarity about why they're a and one is as we've been talking about it, the transportation conflict, and what's been reported is the kind of division between some of the retail operators and some of the restaurant operators. Anyone on the committee who wants to comment on that? And then you mentioned something about 400 block. I have no idea what you were referring to there.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So here was sort of here's my thinking about the 400 block. So the 400 block is that last block before you go under the 101, and it's not closed right now. It's pretty ratty. And so my concern is, from a tourist perspective, and just from a perspective from somebody who lives here, it's not very inviting. So if you're staying in the Funk Zone or, on the waterfront, and you venture your way to State Street and you go under the underpass, which is going to be improved soon, that's going to be fantastic. I looked at those plans last night after I got home, and they're cool. And then you come up from this, hopefully really lovely underpass area. You come up and the first thing you see is the 400 block of State Street. It's awful. So I think it really needs some focus, and I've been a proponent of closing that block as well. Last night, they talked about maybe just having one lane of traffic, because there are some pretty significant, and I understand that, significant transportation concerns and emergency access concerns. But that's the block I'm talking about, Dick, is that block right as you come from the underpass up onto State Street. If I were a tourist and didn't know what was beyond that, I might just turn around and go back. Cabrillo's lovely. The Funk Zone's fun. Why even bother, sort of walking through there, because you don't know what else is up beyond. So I just think it really requires some focus.
What's funny too, that I didn't realize, I wasn't around then, but that Dave Davis, who was sort of involved is the chair of the committee and was involved in the last time State Street was revitalized under redevelopment, that 400 block, the merchants and the folks on those blocks kind of got to decide, like, do you want to be part of the widened sidewalks and all the stuff that happened? So when all the brick went in and all that, and the 400 block said, no, we don't, right? And so it's interesting now to see like those chickens coming home to roost 20, 30 years later, of like, now people are like, gosh, what's with the 400 block? And obviously it's probably almost completely different merchants at this point. But that's one of the things that's interesting when you go back and look at the history, that they were like, no, we don't want to be a part of it. And now they're very much sort of suffering the consequences of that. So hopefully everybody can work together in this next
We certainly got to clean those chickens out of the 400 block.
Or maybe chickens are exactly what we need. Who knows? If it's a neighborhood,
Maybe so, yes, but cleaner chicken. So and what about this conflict between different kinds of enterprises, restaurant versus retail? Is that a key part of the problem at this point, or how does that play out?
I don't think so. I mean, Tess knows better how the different merchants have been interacting.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I meet really regularly with some different committees within the downtown organization and the Chamber of Commerce. There is a retail focused one and there is a food and beverage focused one. And there are a variety of opinions, honestly, on both of them. Food and beverage generally does like the closed portion of the promenade better. But a lot of retailers really enjoy it as well. There is a mix there. So some retailers don't like it as much. Some really like it. I would argue that it's probably the same percentage that we saw in the community survey, with the 80% and 20%. And that's generally what I hear. It also kind of brings up the property owner question. So we do hear from some property owners on State Street that are not as do not like the promenade the way it is currently, or do not like the idea of a closable space. Again, that's not all of the property owners. That is some of them, but not all. And so it's a complex issue. I think we're going to hear that throughout the process. And I think for the committee and for staff, I think the most important thing is how do we make this space the best it can be? And I mean, regardless of what it is, I think it's exciting to think that the city, that there's investment that's going to happen in downtown, and that we're taking this effort to really think through what it could be rather than slapping it together.
Great. So why don't we open the floor for comments, questions, thoughts from everybody in the space who wants to participate. This has been a great opportunity to hear all these issues and to get a sense of the process going forward, and to get a sense that what I like to hear about this is one of the things is how much you guys are involved trying to learn from what's happening as you go forward. And I feel really good about that. Linda Haneke.
Well, first of all, I want to apologize because Cox killed my connection, so I missed the second half of the presentation. And because we don't have other things on the agenda, I'm kind of hoping that I can spend a couple of minutes talking about a little bit of the recent history, just some observations. So it seems like I'm always looking for that long-term vision. And I really liked going to both of the charrettes. I think it may have been the second one they had in 2018, maybe. That was the first one that I observed. And that was very inspiring and had lots of great kind of visual things that got my attention. And then the same thing happened on steroids with the next charrette, because there were so many people involved, and it just really seemed like we had a lot of momentum. And I was a little disappointed when some of those people and ideas weren't carried forward more than they were. But hopefully, I was glad to see the images that Tess presented from that, because I think that's a huge resource. All of those designers and planners working together and coming up with ideas. One thing, I mean, generally, I think to get momentum back or get it in the first place, we really need more youthful energy. That's kind of my mantra for everything that I'm involved with, because I'm tired, and I think everybody else is too. But one thing that was very inspiring initially was the idea, it was the big idea that we would do something like Meow Wolf. And I don't know if any of you even heard about that at the time, but it was a couple of the people that started a Lucidity Festival. And I think William Macy was involved a little bit in the pitches. He's the developer that did one of the kind of housing artist work co-ops. And the idea, and I imagine there are a few of you that don't know what that is, but it started in Santa Fe, and now there are several more in other cities. But it's kind of I think they call it an immersive art experience. It's kind of a combination of a museum, a maze, a puzzle to solve. You can have lots of different routes that you take through it, so you have a different experience every time. And what's really cool about it, and what would work well in this area, is that it would connect to your history. So you might have some kind of like Chumash story related to it, or other cultures that we have in our area. And in Santa Fe, it provided a couple of hundred jobs for artists. And their town is, if anything, smaller, I think, than Santa Barbara. It contributed millions of dollars to the economy. Now, that was before COVID. And I'm sure they had some huge challenges, like everybody. But it was, one thing I liked about it is it was a focal point that would help tourism, the economy, but it also was for the local folks as well. So, and I think they were focusing on the Macy's location, and that was kind of a non-starter because they had to go through whoever owned that property. And but anyway, it's not something that you need to have that. In the case of Santa Fe, it was supported in large part from George Martin, who's the Game of Thrones author. But, we have our version of that here. We would need to tie into a couple of wealthy philanthropists that we have. Anyway, that's just a thought of how we need some kind of a vision that helps us get beyond arguments about the bikes and the parklets, and something that everybody can kind of look forward to in big picture. And then on housing, I have to start over with my thinking, because I really thought that electric vehicles and self-driving cars were going to be here really quickly. And I jumped on board with that. We don't need parking, for that 200 square feet. You can put a small studio somewhere. So that was a miscalculation. And also now we have all these plans or future developments with a lot of very small units with no parking. And that just feeds the, come to Santa Barbara for your second home mindset. So that's all. Anyway, I'm really glad that, I've seen, Tess, what you've done, and I think that's great. And hopefully we can all kind of get back on board and go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. So I want to pick up what you just said. You're worried that the housing could be upscale luxury apartments. It is very high-end property values, one assumes, on that, in that area. So how do we protect the affordability or make sure there's strong affordable opportunities in the housing that will develop? Does anyone want to? Hillary's your hands up.
I want to pull the parking thread that Linda.
Okay, go ahead. Whatever you want to do. Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I'm a renter here, and I have the concerns about the luxury thing, which in this town, luxury is anything built in the past 20 years, right? Which is not very many things. I do think increasing supply will help to a certain extent, but also we need things like, rent stabilization and all that. But parking, what I would say is, and there's tons of research on this, from a sustainable transportation perspective, transit, biking, walking, the removal of parking requirements for new housing development. A lot of this coming down from the state, thank goodness, after decades and decades of local jurisdictions kind of blowing it, as far as I'm concerned, on that front of having, 2 spaces per unit and things like that. Thankfully, our AUD program reduced that requirement a little. But what I would say, Linda, is when there's housing built downtown and it densifies, the folks, and last night we actually had a whole slide on this, folks don't really truly can live without a car, or reduce, or they don't have to park inches from where they sleep, right? And so we know that our city parking lots are not full by any stretch. And it can happen, right? Like in a normal city, people don't necessarily have to have a car or park or have to drive for everything they do because they're near everything, right? And so what I would say is sometimes that's used, and I know you're not this kind of person, but that parking bludgeon is often used to be like, well, here's why we shouldn't build it all, because you're not going to build parking and it's going to be a big mess. There'll be no on-street parking, whatever, but there are really tried and true levers on how to make sure there's still a parking supply and people who need to park can, but ideally, right, people don't have to. You don't have to have 2.4 cars for every family and things like that. So I would say don't lose sleep over that part, because it's, I think we've seen and we're seeing, even just people who live downtown period in the existing housing stock, that there's way fewer cars per household because they get around other ways as well. So, and if we support that with good infrastructure, good transit to get around, bike share, good bike access, good pedestrian access, then that really ameliorates the need for, you know, a parking spot in every pot.
Very good. Any other thoughts, people?
Well, so I think then the secret is how we keep it local, or how we keep it full-time residents in those downtown units.
Yeah, and I think there's the possibility of ordinances for that kind of thing, is my understanding, but I don't know if there's an appetite for that.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of ways to start to look at different policies for downtown housing. And there are things that are currently in the works in terms of looking at affordability and different types of housing units right now. I think it's a big question though, because I agree with you. The last thing that I think we would want is to have a bunch of second homes in this space that we are creating. And the whole point of this plan is really to create a community in you know, at least from the staff perspective, to create a community gathering space and to create this urban neighborhood and to make it a space that where you're not necessarily going to want to go rent or buy a home over, you know, in San Roque area or upper state, because you could now live maybe in a smaller area, but right downtown, and your kids can go out and play right outside your front doorstep, and you've got a grocery store down the street and all of the amenities are right there. And so there's no, you know, you have everything at your fingertips. And that's a lot of times there's conversations about how great a lot of the European cities are, and for a variety of reasons. And that's often how people live in many European cities. They're not out, they're living right in their city center. And that's why there's so much vibrancy when you go down and you're shopping for your groceries and you have a cafe and you have a retail shop. And so trying to really think about how can Santa Barbara make something like that a reality in our downtown, and then also make it accessible for a variety of people. But it's a challenge. It's how do we really think through policy at the local level to get at that core? And that's not an easy task.
Very good. Thank you. I mean, I guess people may know this, but there are some rules about preferencing local, you know, there's so-called fair housing restrictions on how much preferencing of tenants you can create. But, and maybe Tess, you can comment on that, are there ways those rules can be lifted? Under what conditions can they be lifted? I don't know if you know the answer to that, but I see Susan Racco.
Hi. I missed the presentation at the beginning. I'm so sorry. But I was happy to hear the discussion. And one thing I would say about the housing is I've just been interested in, I don't remember what block it's on, but I walked by it the other day. It's some building. It's a retail building that's being remodeled into very small units. Have you already talked about this?
No.
Okay. It's being remodeled into very like studios, essentially, with some shared common space. I think it's 9 or 11 units.
And is it on State Street?
It's on State Street, and it's
Is
literally
it the Sur La Table building, kind of right by
next
Paseo
to it,
Nuevo?
I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
It's a really cool I think it's a really interesting
So
development.
this is what I've been thinking all along. Not that I've said anything to anyone, but just the idea that what we really need downtown is spaces that won't actually be that attractive to buyers who want to just have a place in Santa Barbara. So small enough that they're really for just one person who wants to have a place to live, isn't going to have a car, but could be part of a vibrant community and live and work downtown. That we just need more spaces like that as much as anything. I mean, there's so many young people who live here for a very short time and then, you know, because they're in college, and then they would love to stay and do something, but they can't because they can't afford to live here.
Right.
And it's just, there's a lot of vibrancy in that possibility, I think. A lot of youthful energy that we could bring to downtown.
Well,
And I still love the Meow Wolf idea.
say what? Sorry.
And I still love the Meow Wolf idea. I think it's brilliant.
I would just comment that in my almost 60 years living here, one of the reasons for our vibrancy are the people who've stayed after going to school here, and they now are a lot of part of who runs the town, but they had the opportunity decades ago to settle down. And you're right, now it's a real crisis in that. Diane, your hand's up.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was one of those that stayed. I came here in 1978. I left for 2 years to go to grad school, and I came back, and I was bound and determined to come back. And it wasn't easy even then in the 80s. So it's just gotten so much harder. But that's not really what I wanted to comment on. I wanted to comment on the fair housing issue and the local preference. So I think the city is exploring that in they've been talking about it with the Hope Fund. And really trying to incorporate local preference in the funds that are used. And there are ways to do it. It's really just making sure that your pool of people isn't so small that it could be considered discriminatory. And I think that at least so far, the city attorneys are pretty comfortable if the pool of potential renters or buyers is limited to the South Coast. So I think there are ways to do that. And I think we should push really hard on those in any housing we get, but especially affordable housing, but any housing that we get.
Right.
And then the other point I wanted to make about affordability and to some degree local preferences, we've got to use some of the properties that the city of Santa Barbara controls and have nonprofit housing developers develop those with 100% affordable housing, because the market isn't going to do it. They're going to provide 10%, maybe 20%. And, you know, we have an affordability requirement in RENA that's close to 70% of all units need to be affordable. So we're not going to get there by developing market rate housing and getting little dribs and drabs of affordable housing. So we really need to first of all, use publicly owned parcels to the extent we can with our nonprofit providers. And secondly, you know, I'm going to beat this drum until something happens. We got to come up with a permanent source for affordable housing, a source of funds for funding for affordable housing. Because if we don't get there, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball. The only time we sort of did a decent job at housing was when we had redevelopment funds flowing into affordable housing. So it's got to happen again.
Thank you. And so since you're on the committee, I believe you're going to try to incorporate what you just said into the master plan, right? That
Yes.
would be a very crucial step.
Yes. I mean, I consider that to be the primary role for me on the committee, because I'm representing the League of Women Voters. So that's our biggest interest.
So by the way, when I alluded to people staying and making this town what it is, it's a lot of people in this space are in fact, you know, I should have made that point. A lot of people sitting here, including Hillary, Spencer, Jonathan, among people that I know, are people who've stayed here and are leaders of our town. And where would we be without them? Okay, so any other key points? I still maybe I'll just be upfront about this. I don't understand why the mayor intervened the way he did, and maybe someone has an explanation for that. He's even saying he's even implying he doesn't care about the polls that show what people want in terms of closure. And I don't get it. Diane, do you have a
No,
comment?
I'll speak because I have the least to lose on this call. And I know it's being recorded. You know, Randy's never been a fan of closing State Street.
Right.
He fought it and fought it and fought it. And I still think he's not a fan. And he didn't get his way. And so he's, you know, using his position as mayor to bully people. That's what I think.
So the one thing we can say in that
I'm
regard,
gonna-
oh, go ahead, Kristen. You,
I think just because I'm not comfortable discussing him when he's not here.
I agree.
And I don't think he's spoken for himself actually quite effectively in writing and in interviews. And I just, I think maybe you should invite him to come to a meeting would be probably the best way to answer that question. We can all
That's a good
for
idea.
ourselves
That's a good idea.
perspectives, but I don't think any of us, and particularly because we have staff member here also.
No, I get it. So that's why I was sort of holding back, but I thought I'd put it on the table. And I would say in Randy's favor that even though he has strong views, he also does listen, I believe. And so that's a great suggestion, Kristen. And maybe that's going to happen in this very space. Because others have said we ought to do that. Hillary.
I just want to, you know, sort of like going forward, mention, you know, because I think a lot of people on this call are very active in the community, and whether you live in the city of Santa Barbara or not, State Street is your place too, right? And so I'm always encouraging Galetans and Santa Marians and whoever to, you know, people generally come and interact downtown Santa Barbara at least every once in a while, to get engaged and to get involved and to keep track of what's going on and to participate. You know, Tess gave the information about the website. You can sign up for, you know, agenda alerts when a meeting's coming up. It's a good email list to get on, and just get engaged, even if it's not like the most important thing to you. Thanks for putting the link. It's gonna matter, and you all have been involved in local government and advocacy for long enough to know the people who show up to public comment, right? Depending on the thing, a lot of them have absolutely nothing better to do than grind that axe all day long on whatever topic it is. And a lot of us are like too busy working and living our lives to go and engage, but it's really, really important. If you care about one of these things or have an opinion, or you know people who do, encourage them to get involved. Take any survey that comes out, go to the meetings either physically, or you can give public comment on Zoom, which is nice. You can send an email right in. It's really important that we hear from the broadest base of people, because I think at the end of the day, we'll feel more confident in the final plan if we heard from everyone. Is everyone going to get their way or their favorite thing? It's impossible, right? But we want to at least hear all the different parts of the community that have a stake in it, because I think we really all do. So I'd just say get involved, stay tuned, and participate as much as you can.
Well, that was a great almost finale speech, unless other people have thoughts that they want to make sure get heard. If I want to really say how grateful I am that all of you from the committee, Hillary, Kristen, Tess, and Diane, were able to be here and be enlightened. And I think the very things you've been talking about are going to stimulate those of us who heard them to pay more attention and to be engaged in the process. It actually, looking at Tess's presentation with those slides made me excited about, imagining and doing part of the imagination part, but also these controversies that seem, I think we're all impatient with those controversies. They seem to be holding us back rather than moving us ahead. But I think we've got a good committee here working on this, and I'll stop being press talk, giving all the pep talk. So any other announcements or things that people want to call attention to before we close this session? Nobody has any?
I have one, Dick.
Go ahead, Ken.
Hi, everybody. Ken Huff, Executive Director. And I just want to point out and thank Nadia for her 2.5+ years supporting this committee and best we can generally. I'm going to miss you so much. Your last day.
Not, I want to add
Thank you,
to that.
Ken.
I want to add to that. Nadia has been invaluable for SB and for the community. She's helped organize things like this, as well as doing very effective public advocacy, lobbying, and organizing. And we are going to, SB is the we here, is going to be seeking staff people to fill her shoes if possible. But we hope after she explores the planet, she's going to come back to Santa Barbara and still be an engaged person in whatever ways she chooses to be. So give her applause in a Zoom fashion. There are different ways to do it. Thank you. And Nadia, you know we love you, so come back to where you're loved. That's where you should be. The rest of the planet is overrated, says Hillary.
Thank you, Dick.
I'm with you. I'm with you, Hillary, on that. I mean, and
Well,
you.
I'll definitely be coming back to Santa Barbara, so no worries. No
That's why I
worries on
said
that.
Yeah. That's why I said what I said. All right. Thank you. Nice to see you all. Enjoy the weather if we can. It's beautiful here, not elsewhere. Anything else? Going once, twice?
Yeah, many thanks to Dick as well as Nadia, both of you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, it's nice for me. I love doing this. It's instead of teaching, which I can't do anymore. So, all right, great. And save the chat. There's things there that you might want to keep. Thank you, Tess. Thank you. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.